The bell rang, but the sound didn't loosen the knot of dread in Adrian Cole's stomach. The billionaire's son, heir to the Cole tech empire, stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the red F bleeding across his test paper like a fresh wound. Students brushed past him, whispering. Teachers sighed when they saw him. His father's voice echoed in his mind. Failure is not tolerated in this family. But as Adrian lowered the paper, he caught the eyes of someone who wasn't laughing, whispering, or looking away. A school janitor, a quiet older woman with a wrapped headscarf, dark skin weathered by time, and eyes sharper than every professor he'd ever met, was watching him. Not with pity, not with judgment, with recognition. She turned away before he could speak, but not before murmuring words that chilled him. Your problem isn't the test, boy. It's the secret you don't know you're carrying. Before we continue, click subscribe, like this video, and comment what time it is that you're watching this video. Your support helps us bring more wonderful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get back to the stories. Adrian Cole had spent most of his life learning how to pretend. Pretending to smile at galas. Pretending to enjoy strategy meetings with his father's business partners. Pretending he wasn't suffocating in the expectations strapped to his shoulders like iron weights. But there was one thing he couldn't even pretend to be: smart. At least, not in the way people expected the son of Richard Cole, the most feared tech billionaire in the Eastern Corridor, to be. School had always felt like a storm he could never outrun. No matter how much he studied, the answers twisted themselves into riddles, slipping out of reach. Tutors came and went, each failing to spark understanding. Psychological evaluations were inconclusive. His father refused to hear excuses. Brains are built, not born, Richard Cole insisted. If you fail, it is a choice. So, according to his father's logic, Adrian was choosing failure. Repeatedly. That day's test was his worst yet. An F circled so heavily the ink had bled through the paper. His math teacher barely looked at him when she handed it back, as if exhaustion had replaced hope. He wandered into the hallway like a ghost searching for a place to haunt. He couldn't go home yet, not with this grade. As he walked, he sensed someone watching him. Turning his head, he spotted the janitor again. The same woman who always scrubbed the floors before dawn and pushed her cart down the hall long after everyone left. She rarely spoke, rarely looked up, yet she always seemed to be listening. He didn't even know her name. He tried to walk past her now, keeping his shame buried in the crumpled test he held. But then she stopped sweeping, leaned on her broom, and spoke without looking at him. You keep holding that paper like it's a verdict, she said. Adrian froze. He didn't respond. He wasn't used to people talking to him unless they wanted something from his father. The woman slowly turned toward him. Her eyes were dark but bright in a way that unsettled him, like she could see through the armor he spent years building. You don't understand what you're fighting, she said softly. But I do. Adrian swallowed. Ma'am, I really don't want to talk about. It's not the talking you need. It's the truth. He frowned. What truth? She didn't answer. Instead, she gave him a single nod toward the East Wing hallway. Be there. Tomorrow. Before first bell. And then she walked away, broom echoing in the empty corridor. Adrian stood still, confused, embarrassed, and oddly curious. He spent the rest of the day in a fog. His friends, if he could call them that, were too self-absorbed to notice his distraction. His teachers had given up on trying to understand him. And his father? He was out of the country, but even from afar his disappointment weighed heavily. That night, Adrian sat in his massive bedroom overlooking the city skyline. His textbooks lay open in front of him, but the words swam like fish underwater. His chest felt tight, his thoughts loud and messy, a chaotic blur he couldn't untangle. His father's voice rang again in his head. There is no room for weakness in this family. Adrian shut his eyes, gripping the edge of his desk. His mind felt like a locked room without windows, and the key was missing. But the janitor's words gnawed at him. Ido. She couldn't possibly know what was wrong with him, right? Teachers didn't know. Doctors didn't know. He didn't know. Yet she'd looked at him like she recognized the storm inside him. At midnight, he still couldn't sleep. His alarm blared at 6 the next morning, though he'd barely closed his eyes. He dressed in his uniform, grabbed his backpack, and stepped into the car waiting to take him to school. His driver tried to make small talk. Adrian ignored him. He arrived earlier than usual, long before the building filled with noise and judgment. The East Wing hallway was dimly lit, the air cold and still. His breath echoed. His heartbeat sounded too loud. "She's not coming," he whispered to himself, but she did. The janitor appeared from behind a supply closet door, pushing her rolling cart with deliberate movements. She didn't smile, didn't greet him, didn't waste a breath on small talk. "You came," she said simply. "You told me to," he replied. "That's not why." She locked the supply closet, motioning for him to follow her. He hesitated before stepping forward. "What's your name?" he asked. "Miss Olamide," she answered. There was something ancient in the way she said it, like the name carried history, weight, secrets. "What do you want from me?" Adrian asked. She gave him a long, quiet look. "I want to show you what no one else bothered to see." He frowned. "See what?" Miss Olamide placed a gloved hand over his test paper, the one he didn't realize he was still holding. "This," she said, tapping the F, "is not a measure of your mind. It's a symptom." "A symptom of what?" Her response was calm, firm, and unsettling. "A gift. One you were never taught how to use." Adrian laughed bitterly. "A gift? Miss, I've failed every major test for 3 years straight." "You've failed because you've been taught wrong," she replied. "Your brain doesn't learn the way theirs does. It learns faster, far faster, but only if you understand the pattern." "What pattern?" She stepped back, picked up a piece of chalk from her cart, and pointed to an empty classroom. "Come inside. Let me show you." Adrian stared at her, torn between fear and curiosity. But something deep inside him whispered, "Go." And for the first time in his life, Adrian Cole listened to the voice that wasn't his father's. The classroom Miss Olamide led Adrian into was dark except for a sliver of morning light sneaking through the blinds. Dust drifted in the glow, floating like tiny ghosts. She closed the door gently behind them, then walked straight to the chalkboard. Adrian sat cautiously in the front row, his heart thudding. He'd been in classrooms his whole life, but this felt different. Like he wasn't entering a lesson, but crossing a threshold. Miss Olamide wrote a single number on the board, 47. Then she stepped aside. "What do you see?" she asked. He blinked. "A number. 47. "No," she said. "Look again." He stared harder. "Miss Olamide, it's just a number." "Exactly." She tapped the chalk against the board. "But that's why you're failing. You don't see anything else." Her words struck him strangely, like she was poking at a bruise no one else knew existed. She wrote another number next to it, 238. "What about these?" she asked. 238. And he hesitated this time. The numbers seemed to pull at him, like pieces of a puzzle he didn't know how to solve. "And nothing," he finally admitted. Miss Olamide exhaled through her nose. Not an annoyed exhale, more like confirmation. "You've been trained to think in straight lines," she said. "Numbers, words, ideas. They were taught to you as fixed shapes. But that is not how your mind works." Adrian frowned. "Then how does it work?" She held up her hand. "Close your eyes." He hesitated. "Why?" "Because sometimes the truth is easier to see in the dark." Adrian shut his eyes slowly. "Now," she said, "I want you to imagine the number 47. "I see pieces," he said. "Different shapes. It's like they're not numbers. They're blocks. When he opened his eyes, Miss Olamide was watching him with the expression of someone who had been waiting years for that exact answer. You see in patterns, she said, not in symbols. That is your gift. My gift, he echoed skeptically. Yes, she replied. Your mind rearranges information faster than most people can read. But only if you stop forcing yourself to use their methods. Adrian slouched back in his seat, a mix of relief and frustration swirling in him. Why didn't any teacher ever see that? He asked. Because they were looking for what was wrong with you, she said. Not what was right. Her words hit him harder than he expected. She walked back to the board and drew a simple square. Your teachers want you to put knowledge in boxes. Then she drew a swirling spiral beside it. But your mind follows paths. She circled the spiral. You learn through motion, not memorization. Through relationships, not repetition. Adrian's chest tightened. Is that why, when I read textbooks, the word scatter? Like they won't stay still long enough for me to understand them. Exactly, she said. Not because you're slow, but because you're fast. Too fast for flat teaching. Adrian stared at his hands, the shame he'd carried for years trembling at the edges. So I'm not broken? He whispered. Miss Olamide stepped closer, her voice firm. Child, there is not a broken bone in your mind. There is only an unused muscle. A breath escaped him. A fragile, trembling breath he didn't realize he'd been holding since he was 10 years old. So what do I do? Adrian asked. We train, she said. Train? For what? To see the world the way your mind demands. She walked to her cart, pulled out a stack of old notebooks. Yellowed pages with scribbles, diagrams, and strange looping symbols inside. These belong to my son, she said softly. Adrian straightened. Your son, she nodded. A brilliant boy, a hidden learner like you. The school system failed him too, until I learned how to teach him. What happened to him? Adrian asked gently. Her eyes flickered with a pain she quickly hid. That is a story for another time. Adrian didn't push. Open the first notebook, she instructed. He did. Inside were puzzles, patterns made of shapes that morphed into numbers, numbers that morphed into equations. They weren't traditional problems. They were alive, connected, rhythmic. He felt his mind spark, curiosity igniting like a match. These exercises, she said, will rewire the way you think about thinking. They will unlock how your mind organizes the world. Adrian looked up. You're saying I can actually learn? That I can pass. You can excel, she corrected. If you trust this process. He swallowed. I want to. Her face softened for the first time since he'd met her. Good. Then our work begins. For the next hour, Adrian and Miss Olamide worked through the exercises. At first, he stumbled, old habits slowing him down. But as she guided him, something remarkable happened. The numbers stopped fighting him. The ideas stopped slipping away. For the first time in his entire academic life, he felt in control. When the morning bell rang, Adrian didn't want to leave. You must go to class now, she said. But come back tomorrow. And the next day. And the next. I will, he said. As he walked toward his homeroom, for the first time ever, Adrian wasn't afraid of learning. But that feeling didn't last. Because waiting outside his classroom, arms folded, eyes like knives, was a man Adrian never expected to see yet. His father, Richard Cole. And he did not look pleased. Richard Cole stood in the hallway like a granite statue, motionless, cold, and carved with disappointment. Students passed him in cautious arcs, avoiding eye contact as if proximity alone might trigger consequences. Adrian's breath caught in his throat. Not today, he thought. Not when he had finally tasted hope. Adrian. His father's voice was quiet but lethal. Yes, sir? Adrian managed, forcing his spine straight. Richard lifted the test paper, and the red F glared like a wound against his chest. Explain this. Adrian opened his mouth, but the words tangled in his throat. How could he explain something he had only just begun to understand? I'm working on it, he said weakly. Working on it? Richard repeated, voice rising just enough to chill the air. I received a call from the school. This is your 7th failing grade this semester. Students nearby froze, listening. Richard stepped closer. You are 18, Adrian. Do you have any idea what happens if this continues? You think colleges accept charity because your last name is Cole? No, they expect brilliance. Adrian felt the familiar sting of humiliation creeping up his neck. His hands trembled. I know, he whispered. No, Richard snapped. You don't know. You don't know how much I've invested. Tutors, programs, evaluations, and still nothing. Adrian clenched his fist. I'm trying. Trying is what people say when they are comfortable with failure. Richard cut in. The hallway was silent. Then Miss Olamide turned the corner. She hesitated when she saw Richard, but her expression didn't falter. She read the scene instantly. The crushed boy, the furious father, the paper clutched like a weapon. Excuse me, she said, her tone calm but firm. You are blocking the students. Richard turned to her slowly. This is a private matter. It's happening in a public hallway, she replied. Nothing private about that. Adrian felt panic slam into him. If she said one wrong thing, if his father discovered he'd been meeting her, I'll move when I'm done, Richard said icily, turning back to Adrian. Miss Olamide didn't move. Her voice softened but carried an unshakable authority. Sir, the boy is overwhelmed. Let him breathe. Richard's eyes narrowed. And who exactly are you to advise me about my son? Adrian's stomach dropped. But Miss Olamide didn't flinch. I'm someone who sees what you don't. Richard let out a low laugh. A janitor? You believe you understand my son better than I do. Yes, she said simply. The hallway went still. Adrian felt both fear and awe. His father stepped forward, face hardening. Do not presume to speak about matters that are beyond your station. Adrian felt something inside him snap. Dad, stop. Richard turned slowly, stunned. Adrian had never raised his voice to him, ever. He's right, Adrian said quietly, gesturing to Miss Olamide. She knows something no one else has figured out. I'm learning because of her. Richard stared at him as if he'd spoken a foreign language. You're learning, he repeated. From a janitor? Yes. Silence. Then Richard's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Adrian, we will discuss this at home. You're leaving school. Now. Adrian's throat tightened. Dad, please. I'm not asking. He grabbed Adrian's arm. Adrian winced. Not from pain but from shame. The same old shame he thought he'd finally outrun. Miss Olamide stepped forward. Let the boy go. Richard turned slowly toward her. I don't know what fantasy you've put in his mind, but it ends now. Adrian's heart hammered. His father didn't understand. He would take him away. He would rip apart the only chance Adrian ever had of being more than a failure. And then, Miss Olamide said something Adrian never expected. Your son is gifted. Richard froze. Adrian froze. What? Richard said sharply. He processes the world differently, she said. He learns in patterns, in motion. He needs a different method, one your money tutors never bothered to understand. Richard scoffed. You're suggesting he's talented? When his academic record is a disaster. Yes, she said. Because no one taught him the way his mind works. Richard stepped closer, eyes blazing. You presume much. I presume nothing, she replied calmly. I know. Something cracked in Richard's expression. Something small but visible. A flicker of uncertainty. Adrian recognized it. It was the same expression his father got whenever he encountered something he could not control. Richard turned to his son. "Is this true?" Adrian swallowed. "Yes." His father stared at him for a long, suffocating moment. Then, without a word, he walked away. Adrian nearly collapsed against the lockers. Miss Olamide touched his shoulder gently. "He heard you," she whispered. "No," Adrian said shakily. "He's angry. He'll shut this down. He always does." "No," she repeated. "Not this time." "How do you know?" She looked at him with soft, ancient sadness. "Because I know what it is to be a parent who has failed a gifted child. I know the weight of regret, and I saw that weight in his eyes." Adrian went silent. Miss Olamide stepped back, rolling her card again. "Our training continues tomorrow," she said. "But if my father, if he stops you here," she said, "then we will meet somewhere else. The library, the courtyard, the bus stop down the road. A mind like yours must not be abandoned." Adrian nodded slowly. His fear melted into resolve. "Miss Olamide?" he asked quietly. "Yes, child. You said your son was like me. What happened to him?" She paused mid-step. The hallway hummed with silence. Then she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of a storm. "He was gifted," she said, "and the world refused to see it until it was too late." Adrian's breath caught. Before he could ask more, she turned and disappeared around the corner, leaving her haunting words echoing in the empty hall. The bell rang, but Adrian didn't hear it, because now, for the first time, he was afraid not of failing, but of what he didn't yet know. The next morning, Adrian arrived at school before dawn, not out of eagerness, but fear. Fear that his father would return. Fear that Miss Olamide might not. Fear that the thin, fragile thread connecting him to hope had already snapped in the night. But when he stepped into the East Wing hallway, she was there, quiet, steady, sweeping the floor in slow arcs that echoed through the empty corridor. She didn't look up, but she said, "You're early." "I barely slept," Adrian admitted. "I know," she said. "Sit." He sat on the hallway bench. Her eyes lifted to him, sharp, perceptive, knowing. "Today," she said, "we push further." She led him into the same unused classroom, the same chalkboard, the same dust swirling like secrets in the morning light. She handed him another notebook, thicker, heavier, worn around the edges. "These were my son's advanced exercises," she said. "You are ready." Adrian opened the pages. Shapes, spirals, patterns that bent into equations. Equations that folded into logic puzzles. Logic that unfurled into visual sequences. It felt like diving into a new language, one written directly for his mind. For an hour he worked. Miss Olamide corrected his missteps, encouraged his insights, never rushed him, never shamed him. He had never learned like this before, not in all 18 years of his life. By the time the sun fully rose, he had solved patterns he once believed were impossible. He closed the notebook, breathless. "Miss Olamide, how did you even learn to teach like this?" "I didn't," she said. "I had to." She took a slow breath, the kind someone takes before reopening an old wound. "You deserve to know the truth," she said. "About my son." Adrian leaned forward. She placed both hands on her broom, gaze drifting toward the window. He was bright, too bright. He saw numbers like colors, read books like landscapes, solved puzzles before I even finished reading the questions. Her voice softened, but the school called him difficult, distracted, defiant. Adrian felt his stomach twist. "They told me he was lazy," she continued, "unmotivated, falling behind." Her jaw tightened. "They never asked how he learned. They only punished him for not being like everyone else." She paused. Her next words came out brittle. "He started believing them." Adrian swallowed hard. What happened? He whispered. Miss Olamide looked at him, really looked, and in her eyes he saw grief carved deep. He shut down, she said. Stopped trying. Stopped speaking. Stopped smiling. And one day, he didn't come home after school. A tremor ran through Adrian. They found him by the river, she said. Alive, but barely. The doctors said he had been overwhelmed for years, that his mind was drowning. Tears gathered in Adrian's eyes. He blinked them away. I lost him, she said quietly. Not to death, but to the world's blindness. She stepped toward Adrian. And I swore, her voice cracked, that if I ever met another child with a mind like his, I would not let the world destroy him too. Silence. Heavy. Thick. Full of unspoken promises. Adrian wiped his eyes. Miss Olamide, I won't let you down. She touched his shoulder. You could never let me down. You were born seeing differently, and what you see is powerful. He nodded, chest tight with gratitude. But before he could say another word, the classroom door slammed open. Richard Cole stood in the doorway. Adrian shot to his feet. Dad! Richard held up a hand. His expression was unreadable. Not fury. Not disappointment. Something else. Something unsettling. I spoke to your teachers, he said. Adrian swallowed. I spoke to the principal, Richard continued. Miss Olamide's face remained calm, unreadable. And I spoke to your mother. Adrian winced. His mother rarely spoke to him unless it involved public appearances. Richard stepped into the room. I also reviewed the notebooks you brought home last night. Adrian froze. He didn't even realize he'd taken them. But in his exhaustion, he must have. Miss Olamide stepped protectively in front of him. Sir, if you're going to belittle the boy again. No, Richard said sharply. That's not why I'm here. He turned to Adrian. At first, I thought you were being deceived, manipulated, led to believe in some fantasy that excused your failures. Adrian's chest tightened. But then, Richard said, I tried to solve one of the exercises myself. Adrian's eyes widened. I couldn't, Richard admitted. He turned to Miss Olamide. It took me 20 minutes to understand the pattern. He solved it in 5. Adrian blinked. You checked my answers? I checked everything, Richard said. And I realized something I should have realized years ago. He stepped closer. You are not slow, he said. You are not broken. You are not a failure. Adrian's breath hitched. Richard looked down as if ashamed. I failed you, he said quietly. I tried to force you into a mold. Tried to make you learn the same way I did. Tried to shape you into my reflection. He lifted his head. But you are not my reflection. You are something else entirely. Adrian felt his vision blur. His father, the man whose approval he had chased his entire life, was finally seeing him. Richard turned to Miss Olamide. You, he said, saw what 100 tutors and specialists missed. You taught him in 2 days what he hasn't learned in years. She nodded slowly. Richard took a breath. What do you need? Supplies? Resources? A larger space to teach him? I will provide it. Miss Olamide stared at him. Her voice was gentle. I don't need anything, sir, except your patience and your trust. Richard nodded. You have both. Adrian couldn't breathe. Emotion tightened his throat. His father placed a hand on his shoulder. I want you to continue this training, Richard said, as long as you need. With her. Adrian nearly collapsed in relief. Miss Olamide stepped aside, pride softening her expression. Richard looked around the dusty classroom. Then he took out his phone. This is too small, he muttered. I'll have a learning suite built on campus. Spacious, private, fully equipped. Adrian's jaw dropped. Dad. No debates, Richard said. Your education matters. And clearly, I've been going about it the wrong way. He squeezed Adrian's shoulder. Let's do it your way. A single tear rolled down Adrian's cheek. Miss Olamide smiled. One of the rare, warm smiles that lit her tired face. He will thrive, she said. Yes, Richard replied. He will. The bell rang outside. Students scattered. Teachers shouted instructions. The day began like any other. But for Adrian Cole, everything had changed. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of school, wasn't afraid of learning, wasn't afraid of failing, because he finally understood his mind, because someone finally saw him, because he wasn't alone anymore. Miss Olamide picked up her broom. Richard extended his hand to her, not as a billionaire, not as a superior, but as a man acknowledging someone wiser. She shook it. Adrian stood between them, the boy who once failed every test, now rising into the life he was meant to live. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the school, the world that had once rejected him began to shift, not because he changed for it, but because he finally learned to see it in the way only he could. The end.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.